All right, welcome everyone. So today we're going to be talking about Chapter 7, Sections 3 and 4. Probably mostly have time to focus on Section 3. So the rise of populism. Throughout this lecture, we're going to be writing some things down, so please make sure you have a paper and pencil handy. When I ask for you to pause, please pause and write down your responses for things. All right, so to start, we're going to start with the first question here. So, can farmers produce too much? Um, Go ahead and write your responses down. Pause the video if necessary. So, growing up here in central Nebraska, most of us have probably seen things like this picture here where we've seen large amounts of corn being taken in during harvest time. So, kind of a difficult question. Can farmers actually produce too much? The answer would be yes, they can. That is the plight of the farmers. The more successful they are, the more detrimental it is to them in the long run as a group, as a unit. Individually, each farmer wants to produce as much as possible because the more crops they have, the more they can take to the market. The more they can take to the market, the more money they can make. However, as a unit, if a lot of them are producing these huge yields and having great crops, the supply really goes up. And so when we think about terms of economy and economic terms of supply and demand, the greater the supply generally leads to a lower demand, just because there's so much available that the price of it actually goes down. So farmers are in a way kind of Machiavellian in that sense that they want themselves to do well, but they want other farmers actually to not be so successful. This is a vocab term, actually, bumper crops, where we have these farmers with these huge crops. If you think those old straight trucks filled bumper to bumper with their crop, that is a lot of corn, and that's a good thing individually, but in the long run, it hurts the market. So late 1800s, we see farmers having these huge crops. In fact, they start to take this money that they're making and actually buy more land, and they want to put more land into cultivation. The more crops they can produce, the more money they can make theoretically. But as more and more people are continuing to do this, the market is getting filled up with crops. And so since that demand is going down, the price in turn is going down as well. So farmers are actually starting to make less money. The other problem that farmers are going to be facing in the late 1800s is the rising transportation costs. Since the market has grown, they need some way to get their product across the country to try to find new markets. And their only way to do this, predominantly, is through the railroad. The problem with this is that the railroad can kind of charge whatever they want to the farmers. So as farmers are producing their crops, taking it to market, the railroad gets to determine the transportation cost for them. And so now their value is going down since more people are producing. The railroad is rising the cost of transportation, and they're just kind of stuck with being a powerless point in society. And so farmers are struggling. Overall, farmers are struggling. So they're trying to figure out what they can do to kind of even the playing field here a little bit. So they're going to start to combine. They're going to start to work together and form unions. So first part here. So the farmers are actually going to form the patrons of husbandry, also known as blank. So let's go ahead and write our response to that one. The patrons of husbandry also became known as. The next one, farmers alliances. They're going to start to work together and form blank. So a way to buy and sell in bulks, so that way they have a larger pool of credit and resources. So farmers are going to start to work together. They're going to form blank. And the last one, so who believe that farmers should be freed from exploitation of railroads, banks, and merchants. It's going to be this formal political group. So take a little time, pause if you need to. Think about your responses here. Write your responses down for these blanks. So rolling back through them, farmers are going to start to combine together. The first farmers union is actually going to start kind of south central United States, mostly in Texas, but it's going to span all the way to East Coast, all the way up to New England. So they're going to form the patrons of husbandry, also known as the Grange. So that's our first response there. The next one, they're going to start to work together. These alliances are going to start to go, well, how can we buy in bulk? If we can buy things in bulk, if we can buy our seed in bulk, if we can take things to market in bulk, we can start to hold back on that supply and try to raise the demand. So they're going to form, these alliances are going to form co-ops. That would be our second blank. So co-ops are going to start to buy and sell things in bulk. If you think back to this picture, that's probably what we're thinking of, where we see these huge amounts of corn being held so that farmers can hold things together, hold them in what today we think of grain bins, so that way they could sell things in bulk and try to raise that demand. The final blank. So blank believed that farmers should be able to be freed from the exploitation of the railroads, the banks, the merchants, the Populist Party. They're actually this Grange is going to develop into a national movement of people fighting against the power. So the Populist Party, right, which will eventually be led by none other than William Jennings Bryan, the famous Nebraskan. So the part we're going to finish off with today, who made up the Populist Party and what were their goals? And the last question, brainstorm pros and cons of unions. Unions kind of get a bad rep in today's society. What's good about them? What's bad about them? So hit the pause button. Let's write these down. All right, so hopefully we have our responses written down here. Our first one, who made up the Populist Party and what were their goals? Mostly going to be rural Americans. It's going to spread throughout the country. The Populist Party is going to be kind of the middle to lower class society, kind of banding together to fight against these big banks. In the East, predominantly is where we're going to see them. They're going to be fighting against the railroads. It's the small timers that are banding together to try to get themselves a voice. They felt like they were getting kind of left out of society. In today's world, we think about the 99% versus the 1%. Very similar. Those are similar ideas that those were 100 years ago that we're starting to see kind of resurge yet today. Brainstorm some pros and cons of unions. Some of the pros, it gives the voice to the little guy. They start to have power. They can take back some of that power from the larger groups. It's a way to get their voices heard. It's a way to improve working conditions, usually a way to improve hourly wages, which is another movement we're going to see in the cities. Some of the cons, sometimes they start to get a little too much power. They can start to manipulate the big business. They can start to get a bad name for themselves because they hold out and actually hurt the overall economy of the United States. Also, when they refuse to work, sometimes they hurt individuals as well. For example, teachers have gone on strike before, and some people see that as a way of hurting the education of the children that they care about. So there's definitely some pros and cons to unions. That's it for today. So go ahead and review the rest of the section.